Morgan. Finally, we get together again to have.
Yes, we're both busy women, aren't we? It takes a while.
Yes.
Anyway, nice to see you. Yeah.
Very nice to see you too.
Mhm.
You and I had talked about the possibility of talking about trauma.
Yeah.
And about how both of us are ongoing experiences of trauma, and of course, as always with constellations, the historic burden that everybody's carrying. That's also ongoing.
And managing current trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
At first, the first place I'd love to start is with us talking about, like, what would we want to be in a trauma curriculum when we're teaching people to become constellation facilitators? What do we include in a trauma curriculum? What do we think about in a trauma module?
I guess the starting place for me would be, what is it? What is trauma? Because I have seen people it's become a bit like the word abuse. It can be overused. And I have heard people say, oh, I'm traumatized, or you're traumatizing me. And I'm thinking, no, I don't think I'm traumatizing you. I might be disturbing you, or, rocking your boat or something. But I'm not traumatizing you. So I think what is trauma? The definition of what people think trauma is and what it isn't.
How do you define it?
I think it was Freud. He said something like an overwhelming stimulus that penetrates our outer barrier, something like that, penetrates our outer boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I remember Hunter saying something quite profound, Hunter Beaumont, something about it's not the trauma, but how we manage it or how we view it that is the important thing. And you said something about that, didn't you?
Yeah. I like this research from Nepal, where they were working with the kids that came back from the Nepalese Civil War, kids that the Maoist army had what's that word? When they take little soldiers in, conscripted. There we go. And then they came back, and some of them had terrible PTSD and some of them didn't. And so the researchers were like, what's the difference? And the difference was how they were received back. They'd all experienced the same injuries, deaths, illnesses, starvation, all kinds of, war things.
Yeah.
But some of them were great and some of them were not great. And the other element in that was whether or not they'd been tortured. Torture amped up the trauma response to 80% of everybody who'd been tortured.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being deliberately harmed by other humans is.
But yes, if you're resonated with, that reminds me of your book, that then it makes a big difference, doesn't it? If there's someone who's a companion or gives a listening ear with some empathy, it can make an enormous difference. Yeah. And I remember Angwin as well talking about self-agency coming from a healthy attachment. Like if you've had a healthy attachment, you've got more in you to somehow negotiate the trauma and come out the other side and see a kind of a way through. Yeah. She was quoting those children, who were buried somewhere in the States, wasn't it?
The bus children. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
Right.
And it was so interesting. The kids that were a whole school bus full of kids was kidnapped. And the kidnappers drove it into a mountain cave and covered the opening of the cave with rock. They collapsed the front of the cave.
Right.
And the kids in the back of the bus had the window slightly open, and little bits of dirt started falling through the window. And it hit one of the kids on the shoulder, and he kind of came to out of the helpless state and thought, maybe we can dig our way out.
Wow.
And started to dig. Right. And it was like agency, but it was like this moment of grace. Like, how does the universe give us a message that we can actually have agency in really difficult situations?
Yeah. I mean, that's a you know, sometimes I call that angels, you know, it's a sort of almost like something comes from somewhere, you know, that gives us a way out of trauma. Yeah, definitely. So that would be my starting point, really. And then how do you manage someone who becomes traumatized, you know, which can happen in the constellation, recognizing the signs leading up to it, and then managing and helping them come down from that state if they get lost in it.
Yeah. So
So
part of what you do in your curriculum is signs of clients being traumatized.
yeah, you know, the sort of pallor or the glazed look or that kind of thing, where you see them slowly disappearing, becoming disembodied, and helping them to come back into the room in the here and now. So yes, definitely something of that I think is important. Yeah.
Very important. What was Hellinger like on that count? What was his take on this? I'm asking because in about 7 or 8 years ago, I put a letter out to the Constellation community talking about the ways that we could, basically this material, how we could track whether or not a client was doing okay. And I received 11 responses from people saying that Hellinger said that if we paid attention to the client, we were betraying the constellation. And I was like, wow, this is really an interesting and intense discovery that our community has, you know, this sense of integrity that even sometimes precludes the kind of care that I long for every constellation client to receive.
It's interesting. I don't recall seeing a client traumatized with him not paying attention to them. I don't have any personal recognition of that. I do remember doing a supervision constellation with him on behalf of a client who was seriously traumatized and would never have said from her own volition, no, I'd never be strong enough to be in a constellation group, but was very happy for me to go to Bert and say, you know, can I do one on her behalf, if you like.
What happened?
I just set up her parents on his, you know, he said just set up the parents, and they were standing like that, one facing one way and one facing the other way, and they both ended up falling. Interestingly, one was wearing black and one was wearing white, and they both fell to the ground pretty soon on. And the most interesting thing, because that was the constellation, was she got self-agency after that.
Wow.
And, you know, turned her whole life around. She was still in the trauma. I mean, she was 27. And she just got self-agency from that. I mean, who knows if it was to do with that constellation, but, you know, it seemed like, you know, that was the precipitator. So, you know, how he would have been if she'd been there, I don't know. I don't know. But, you know, I've seen him across the range already work very beautifully with people. You know, there was a guy who was very seriously depressed and not really present. And I don't remember the constellation. All I remember is he was being hugged by somebody, his father or something, and he put his hand on, Bert put his hand on his back and said, and how are you doing? And he said, not sure. And then he said, let me tell you something. An Eskimo, Inuit you call it now, went to the Caribbean. It took him a while to get used to it. So he kind of brought humor in, you know, which I thought was rather lovely.
Yes, very lovely.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the difficulty with sitting and watching, and I don't know if this is just Bert, you know, sitting and watching somebody work as you're somewhat outside of the situation. If you're in a group where the field is operating all the time, it's a bit different. But if you're watching him from afar, you can come to all kinds of conclusions that aren't necessarily the case if you're a client, you know. So I'm wary of doing that, you know.
Wary of making a judgment.
Yeah.
On the outside, yes. I had this amazing experience with feng that I think I might have told you about before, but I love it in this context. It was the very first time I was at Bern Reed at the ISCA meeting of International Constellation Facilitation. And um, I said I wanted to work with my father's trauma. And he said, well, what's your issue, you know? And so I told him where I felt like I was being blocked with it. And so we set it up, and he gave me I was holding my sweater. He said, this is your father's trauma, so you hold on to it. Then he was doing this constellation for me to let go of my father's trauma, and I wouldn't let go of it. I was hanging onto it for dear life. And he grabbed the sweater and he put his foot up on my body and he yanked the sweater off my arms. It was the most marvelous moment. I was like, oh. It was one of my favorite moments as a constellation client.
That's amazing.
And the room erupted in a mutiny. The other students were so upset that he had done this, and they weren't even asking me, you know, what it was like for me. They were just upset. But it felt like that movement had released an energy that took over.
Like an epiphany, yeah.
But it took over everybody, and then he had to do like this huge calming piece of work for everybody to get them to come back to.
They were all traumatized. You were fine.
Yes, exactly. It was such a big trauma. It took over everybody, and then he had to. It was very interesting. I think these things are just fascinating. What happens, and I wouldn't do that with a client. But I loved it. I
was going to ask you how you felt afterwards. You felt good.
Yeah, still when I think of it, I feel this enormous, like a cork coming out of a champagne bottle or something.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's, you know, that's a really important point.
Yeah.
You know, when you're looking on from outside, to be careful of your judgment.
Yeah, there's look
at the client.
Yeah, look at the client, ask the client.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's triggered something else from Hunter. He told a story of he saw a woman beating her children, hitting her children, and he was like that. And then he said, I looked at the children, and he said they were not traumatized. It's really interesting. He had his own reactivity, and then he looked beyond that to how the children were receiving it, and he said they weren't traumatized. So make no assumptions. That's something I'm learning.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very interesting stuff.
It's interesting, yeah. And then I drew a sort of diagram thing that I was trying to. Very difficult to do a 2D diagram to demonstrate something that's 3D. You know, I was trying to sort of show that here's your ancestral trauma. It comes into your system here. But you've also got these things out here, yeah? So there may be current trauma, but you've got nature, you've got attachment, you've got the phenomenological process, all that sort of stuff that feeds into. So ancestral trauma, nature, friends, resonance, empathy, and then that all gathers into you, and then you step forward, you know, and somehow it's not as simple as I have ancestral trauma and that's the end of me, you know.
No.
There's so many other things that you can draw on, you know. So trying to put that in a diagram was quite tricky.
Yeah, no kidding. And it reminds me of epigenetics and of the understanding that the maladaptive strategies that we come up with epigenetically on an immune system level, on a weight conservation level, that they are our ancestors' best attempt, in a way, on a genetic level, to prepare us for the world that they were living in.
Interesting. Say a bit more about that.
So, for example, one of the things that we see is that with famine in past generations, that the bodies of people are more likely to have issues with this world, within a world that's full of an abundance of food. There's more diabetes, there's more obesity, there's more unhealthy relationships with eating. But part of what's happening is that, we're eggs inside of the fetus of our mother, inside of our grandmother's body. We're getting a download from our grandmother about what the world is like that our mother doesn't even get, because our mother was inside her grandmother. She has her grandmother's world in her. So we have our grandmother's world marking us. And so then we come out, and then we have these strategies that are like cellular strategies for surviving in the world that our grandmother's body was telling us about. That are then not as helpful now in the world that we're living in, because it's a different world. But there's things about stress too, with Holocaust survivors, similar patterns, where the reactivity, emotional reactivity, is much higher epigenetically, shifted by epigenetics. Reactivity to stress, much more reactive to stress, not because there's a curse from the past generations that makes us reactive to stress, but rather because our ancestors are saying, watch out,
be careful,
this is a dangerous world.
And so I've seen that with Ireland, mothers of children carrying that fear that their children aren't going to have enough to eat.
Yes.
That's kind of, you're right, it's not to do with the here and now at all. I mean, my own parents, because of rationing after the war, had this thing of you must eat every single thing on your plate and that sort of stuff, and think of the starving in Africa, and these kind of interjects that I took in, like, I must eat everything, and I must value my food and all this sort of stuff, and just be careful, make sure that you've got all the basics and that sort of thing. So there's definitely something around that, and I have seen it with the Irish famine,
and with the depression, with the Great Depression in the United States.
I
mean, there's the aftermath of the Irish famine for all of the Irish immigrants, and both my mother and father were children during the Great Depression. My father, when he was tiny, his father, who was very depressed after World War II, he came back from World War II with PTSD, bad PTSD, and wasn't very functional. When my father was 8, he gave my father a little rifle and 2 bullets, and he said, "Go kill us a rabbit for dinner. If you miss, we're not going to have dinner." That was my father's world.
That's a burden.
And my mom grew up in the Depression with her mother being a tailor, her mother being a single mother who had divorced my grandfather because of domestic violence. So they grew up in tenement housing and shared housing, many people to a bedroom, depression, tiny wages. My mother was put out to be an au pair when she was 12. So these are there are those explicit messages from our parents, and then there are the implicit messages that come through the cells themselves, our grandparents.
And it makes so much more sense of some of the problems people have these days, instead of just seeing it on that surface level, to see the profound trauma around that kind of thing. Definitely.
What else do you have in your module on trauma? What else?
I look at the field, so looking at collective trauma, and seeing that we're not alone, and again, I've learned a lot from Angwin around that. That there's trauma everywhere, all of the time, and it's how we deal with it. That's the important thing. So I use the image of the memorations of Stalins to demonstrate the field phenomenon, and how with some traumas, when you're in a field like that and you've got adversity, you can come together as a body, and you can manage that trauma. Well, the example you gave of those children in the bus, you can manage that trauma better because there's a group of you. And so,
and the ones in the back who started to dig didn't have PTSD, and the ones in the front who were who were still frozen in their helplessness
Yeah.
when they were rescued were had much more PTSD. It's
More
very
seriously,
interesting.
more
Yeah,
seriously
yeah,
damaged. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So we look at all of that as well, and then of course I do stuff around the reaching out movement as part of trauma as well. That our birth experiences and our attachment experiences do inform what happens, and the repeating traumatic field that some children get into. They have a trauma at the beginning, that probably has come down from grandmother, and then there's a predisposition to repeat that and to go into fields that are traumatizing unwittingly, of course, but and that's sad for me. It's like, that kind of awareness. And I remember when I got attacked by that horse. I think I told you that story.
I don't remember. They say it again.
I knew intuitively that I should not get over this gate and go into that field.
Oh,
I just had an intuition about it, but I was with a friend and I overrode the intuition. And we went into this field, and there was this horse, to me, looking harmless enough, but he was kind of, now I look back on it, he was kind of just staring into the air, not eating or anything. And I didn't know much about horses in those days. Somebody said to me, "Oh, I'm a bit wary of horses." I said, "Oh no, I quite like horses." So I went prancing up unwittingly, and in a way invaded his space. I went to the front of him rather than gently to the side of him. And I was just stroking his nose like this, and I thought he was being playful. He was kind of doing this. Anyway, then that increased, and he was push, and then he knocked me over. And then I started to scream. I was totally in trauma, and he kicked me in the ribs. And there was a woman kind of up on the bank saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I mean, I remember that thinking, nobody's shouting from up there, "Are you okay?" But this is really interesting. My friend that I was with, she found her aggression. And she went, "You brute," like that, and got her two hands with this great big horse, and just he took off. She flung him off me.
Oh my
And
goodness.
grabbed my hand, and we just ran down to the river, and we're walking across the river. It's crazy looking back on it, drenched, walking across this river. And he was chasing us. I mean, he chased us down the bank. Once we got in the river, he left us alone. But that was a huge thing for me. And I went to the police, because I was covered in bruises and everything, to tell them, and they didn't want to know. Really interesting. And then I talked around in the community, and some people said, oh, they'd experienced it themselves, and the guy who said his 11-year-old boy had been traumatized by the same horse, and the horse was really badly treated. That's what we discovered afterwards, but I don't know really what that was about for me.
No.
In terms of repetitive trauma or anything like that. But what I do know was I stepped over what was right for me. I stepped over my intuition.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest learning. And then I healed that trauma with, have you met Ruud Knappen?
Yes.
Yeah, he works with horses, and he was doing I don't know if you were in it, he did a constellation with us as a group.
I remember, but I didn't go. Yeah.
Which I'd seen in the year before. I didn't have the courage to go, but this year I thought I can do this, so I went with him into the compound. He did a beautiful constellation for the group, the constellation group, where he just asked the question of these two horses, what do we need to do to take care of constellation work? Well, it's really beautiful. And these two horses who were just eating their grass turned. So one was facing out and one was facing in, like that. And he just went, oh, okay, we need to take care of the field outside and inside.
Oh, that's
just beautiful. But while that was happening, I made a connection with one of the horses sideways on, and he was just pawing the ground like this. And I went back through the whole trauma and saw my own part in what had happened. You know, the perpetrator, me,
Yeah.
that invaded his space, and you know, he was seriously traumatized himself as a horse.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, the two of us had come together. It's really healing.
Oh, that's
You
great.
know, just at the same time as this bigger.
The thing
So
was,
it's a constellation within a constellation. You know, and since then, I've, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm fine. I'm still cautious around horses, which is probably very sensible.
yes.
Um, but it's made a big difference. Yeah,
Oh, that's wonderful.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So
The
yeah,
the thing
that's
that
what.
I include in my curriculum on trauma is is to give people this sense that that one of the things that's happening for brains with constellations is that in some way the field is creating a field that's enough like the original trauma field, but enough different from the original trauma field that something different can happen, that it is enough like that it catches, this is the way I use the word resonance, that it, as you know, that it catches the amygdala, that that the amygdala
Right,
goes, yes, yes, I recognize this. This is what happened to me.
right. But
And
I'm not
then
overwhelmed by it.
yeah. And then once it's caught, it's a bit like surfing in a way, that once you catch the wave, you can go all kinds of places and do all kinds of things on the surfboard. But there needs to be that initial sense, or it doesn't need to be. I've seen constellations work without it, but that it can be incredibly helpful when there's an initial sense of, yes, yes, I
Mm,
recognize this.
mm.
And then then so much movement can happen.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of reminds me of Peter Levine's work, you know, where
Yeah.
you're kind of going like this around the trauma, and then you go in for a
Yeah.
while, and then you go to your strength, and you come back in, and pendulating between the two. You know, I like that
Yeah.
approach. So that's the other thing I include is how do other people work with trauma? You
Mm.
know, what are the different ways of managing it? Because there are, I mean, there's a huge array now, isn't there? People managing trauma and dealing with trauma. So it's a huge field. And, you know, how to navigate it within the amount of time we have on the training is
Yeah,
not
exactly.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which takes me to this next question that we have, which is um, now we're living in a world where people are, I mean, they always have been living with ongoing domestic violence, but now we're in Europe, and with those of us who work with people on Skype in Europe or Zoom in Europe, there are a lot of people who are in current day
Mm,
continual ongoing impact of war.
mm, mm,
The pandemic obviously has been an ongoing trauma for people, depending on how isolated or crowded they've been in ways that haven't been healthy for them.
mm,
But the war, it's got like this other, it's amped up people's pain in the groups that I've been working with. And
mm,
even in June, I've been invited specifically to work with a group of people who are supporting who are Ukrainian themselves and in the war zone, and supporting the clients who are experiencing war trauma.
right.
What do you do with that to to support someone who's in such intense present
Mm,
day
mm.
experiences?
You know, for me, the situation both with Ukraine and with COVID,
Mm-hmm.
I think is not separate from what the media are doing, you know, and the sort of ramping up, as I say it, of trauma and instilling fear in people and increasing it all the time. So for me, there's something about that kind of reality check, you know,
Yes. Yeah.
what actually is happening here, and noticing that those who are right next to it or in it, their view narrows, you know, it's like they can only see us and them, or me and him, you
Mm.
know, um, the enemy, if you like, that's attacking me, and so to say, you know, there's a bigger picture or anything like that is just irrelevant. So I know some people in Lithuania, for instance, who, you know, can hear
Oh,
shots being fired or explosions or whatever, you know, and so they're living in that. So all they can see is their lives under threat, you know.
yes.
So I mean, I haven't actually worked hands-on with anybody who's experiencing that.
Uh,
Not, you know, not in the here and now. So, you know, I don't have a direct experience of that.
do you have a direct experience of working with clients who are in ongoing domestic violence situations?
No, I don't. No, I
Okay.
don't.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, there's something similar. I'd actually received a letter this morning from my wondering as all this began to happen, and as I was working with folks in Poland who had Ukrainian refugees in their living room at the time that we were doing the training, and
Mm,
my what I began to understand was that we can have unconscious contracts that prevent us from being accompanied in present time, just like we can have unconscious contracts that prevent us from being helped with past trauma. I will not trust, I will not hope. Um,
so you're talking about the vows that we make?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, that we make,
It's a very useful tool, that. Yeah.
yeah, that we can make vows that prevent self accompaniment or a sense of being accompanied by others. Like I will stay so hyper vigilant that I will not allow any support to come in.
Mm, mm.
You
Yes,
know,
I'll sort of draw a barrier around myself and make myself unreachable. Yeah,
yes, yes, but then
yes, I have seen that.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're unreachable for support as well. And
Mm,
how do we, so then my question is like, how do we, this is what I've been asking in constellation work when I've been working with folks in this situation is, okay, how do we create a resonance, invite a resonance from the field that allows the other, the amygdala of the person who's living through it to say, yes, yes, this is what's happening for me.
mm, mm,
And then to check to see, will, even though the trauma is ongoing, will the client allow themselves to receive constant accompaniment, a
mhm.
sense of constantly being able to accompany themselves? Or, you know, I mean, it's going to go in and out, because as soon as we go into fight or flight, we lose that fight,
Yeah.
flight, and alarmed aloneness. We lose our prefrontal cortex. We
Mm,
lose the part of ourselves that the connection with the field that allows us to feel support.
mm, mm.
But it's actually been interestingly successful. And
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's two ways in which we can kind of reach in to a client that's in that state. One is through touch, and
mm,
then another is the voice. You know, and I remember being myself, you know, usually in representations where I was, you know, pretty out of it and traumatized and whatnot, and hearing a voice saying something which kept me, part of me present, or feeling somebody touch me and keeping me, you know, enough of me that I could be outside of the trauma as well as in it, you know, those sort of two places simultaneously. So I think that's what you're saying, you know, it's to sort of manage to somehow reach in
yeah,
when somebody's in that place where they're not
yeah,
apparently reachable. Yeah.
yeah, and to know that there can be vows that are preventing the access.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And a kind of a loyalty, you know, to repeat that trauma. Yeah.
yeah. Or a loyalty, also a loyalty to the survival. So
Right.
the a loyalty to the nervous system being in fight, flight, alarmed aloneness.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember a film I saw about this. I can't remember the title of it. A woman who was in domestic violence, and then she'd get out of it and she'd go to a women's shelter and, you know, get herself back on her feet, and then she'd find herself back in there, you know, over and over again. And then eventually she did
Get all the
build
way
herself
up.
up and get herself, and that was something to do with self-esteem as well,
Yeah.
like feeling worthy enough to be able to
Yes.
do something different with her life.
Right. And when I worked for all those years, which just has, I'll do it again, but it hasn't been happening during COVID, in the women's prison,
Mm-hmm.
this was very much part of what we were working with,
Was it?
was the ongoing patterns of domestic violence
Mm.
and the like that they'd succeed in leaving one partner, but then the next partner would
Go
be
for another one. Yeah,
so
so that's
similar.
stepping into the
Yeah.
traumatic field again, isn't it?
Yeah,
Repetitive
yeah.
trauma.
Yeah. And I love drawing the relationship between the word family and the word familiar. That
Yeah.
we go to family, we go to the familiar in
Mm.
order to know ourselves. We don't even know that we exist outside
Mm.
of a relationship that feels familiar.
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't seen that connection between family and familiar. That's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's the repetition, isn't it? There's the preparation for it, really, in a way, the predisposition. That's the word I'm looking for. You
Yeah.
know, to find ourselves yet again in the same place. Yeah.
Yes. And in the 2, 3 years since I was in Coffee Creek, the prison that I work in, I've been doing a lot of work. I think you and I maybe have had a conversation about the last time we were together with disgust
Yeah.
and the importance of disgust. And that if we suppress our disgust, or if we're groomed to suppress our disgust, which is what a childhood filled with adverse childhood experiences does to people, is it it
Pushes it
turns
down.
down the volume on our own personal disgust that says we're being violated.
Mm. Mm.
And so there's something also about a a reinitiation into healthy disgust
Mm.
that
Mm.
is something that's important in both the healing of old trauma and the healing of these repetitive patterns
Yeah. Yeah.
to as the healthy disgust gets reinitiated,
Mm.
and
Mm.
people can say, oh, I'm being violent. Oh, I have edges that are being pushed into. Oh, I'm being
Mm.
violated. Oh, I
Mm.
don't like this. This isn't what I want.
It's funny, I remember very early on in my Gestalt training I may have mentioned this before, I don't know, doing an exercise, because Fritz Perls, who was the founder of Gestalt, he
Yes.
wrote a poem on, linking the body's experiences to various traumas. And one exercise we had to do very early on was, there was a tray of food, and we'd have to pick a piece of food and chew it until it was liquid. And that activated the disgust reflex. It's really fascinating. God, there it all is. It's like I just have to do this simple thing, like take this piece of food and put it in my mouth and chew it until it's liquid, and I start to feel this
And
disgust.
what was the link that he was drawing?
Well, that instinct is so suppressed, and
Oh,
so this, in a way, helps us
I'm
to
able to
access this
feel
and
it.
feel
Yeah.
what it's like to know that we don't have to swallow everything.
Yes, exactly.
We don't have to swallow whole what we're
Yeah,
told, what we
right.
experience, and all the
Oh,
rest of it.
we
We
don't have to
can
digest. Yeah.
vomit it up,
Yeah.
not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah. 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 I
So
was,
kind of a visceral experience of how
yeah.
we manage disgust. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. I did receive a letter this morning that I was so pleased to receive from someone that was in ongoing domestic violence that we did a constellation for.
Mhm.
And the person said that it didn't change the domestic violence, but that it changed the way she was with herself in it.
Right.
Um, and eh, and you may be asking, why isn't she leaving this domestic violence situation? She lives in a country with very low income levels and is part of a larger family system, not a husband-wife possibility of
Right.
leaving.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I mean that's back to the self-agency thing, isn't it?
Yes, yes,
Sometimes the field dictates what you can do or
yes,
can't do.
yeah, the fate, that piece of fate versus destiny. That was
Yeah,
part of what Hellinger spoke about.
yeah.
How, what do we do with our destiny given that something in particular is our fate?
Mm,
Yeah,
mm. And maybe there are times when we can't get out
yeah,
of that situation
right,
and we
right.
just need to
But
surrender to what is.
yeah, but we can be very warm with ourselves in the middle of it, even though
Yeah,
it's happening.
yeah.
Yeah,
And that actually facing into it
yeah,
can be the best thing to do. And of course there are other times when we do need to run away.
and
Uh,
can, yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah,
activate our legs and get the hell out of there,
yes, yes,
which we might not have been able to do when it was actually happening.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That ability to flee, to run away,
yeah.
or to fight, to rage and find that bit of ourselves. These kind of reptilian memories are important, aren't they?
Yeah,
Fight,
it's a
fight or
base.
flight helps you get out of freeze.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I do work on that with people a bit, to activate their embodied response in the moment.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Go for
That
a
all
good
sounds,
run or a good yell or something.
yeah, yeah, that reminds me of the somatic experiencing
Yeah,
take on things too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, what is your next focus for your next Constellation magazine? What's the,
Well, it's interesting what's been happening with this current issue coming up, because it's like it's come in late. I always work in a responsive way, and
yeah,
I've usually got quite a few articles in the pipeline. And for a while, I was thinking, I'm not getting anything. What's going on? But I've since had some more, and I have got 2 articles about I don't know if you followed Constellation Talk, with the very heated discussion around LGBTQI,
yeah,
QTI, if I got it right.
yes,
So interesting. So one from a transgender guy, and then one from Karen, who went through what sounds like a pretty traumatic experience of leading a group where
yes,
people got
that's
very
it.
angry with
I
her.
read that one. I was very interested in it in terms of the larger context of of anger in
Yeah, yeah,
groups and with leadership and
yeah.
with university professors and with heads of publishing firms.
Mm.
It's so
It's
it's
a big field, and it's
yeah,
it's where the political and the traumatic overlap, and
yes,
how do you pull that apart and separate it out, and then the
yeah,
guy whose father went through a transgender change from one gender to another as his parent, and how that is for the child.
yeah,
It's a complex field that I learned a lot from following that
yeah,
discussion. I don't know a lot about it specifically, but I could see the sort of field phenomena that were taking place, and was wondering about the navigation of that. How would I navigate that if that happened in a group that I was running? Yeah, it's a
so you
hot
have
issue.
some articles about that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of articles about that, and there's another one promised for the following issue. So
Ah,
it,
when will this
hopefully
next
it'll be an
one?
ongoing dialogue,
Oh, very good.
so the following one will be the following January. Yeah.
What will be the date of issue of this one that you're working on now?
June. Well,
June.
hopefully June.
Hopefully
I
June.
mean, we're almost at June
I
now.
know.
It might be a little bit late. Occasionally it is a little bit over the edge, but mostly I manage it, racing up to the finishing line at the sort of last minute. I said to various people, it's a bit like having children each time, it's sort of the transitional phase of labor, like, oh, I'm never going to get through this, I'm never going to get through this. And then the last bit, you just push the baby out, here it comes. It's kind of fine. So yeah, had a lot of children, if you draw that analogy.
And
Yeah, so yeah, there are other things as well, but that's one that's really, I think, gonna grab people. Yeah. And what's on your horizon?
I'm working on a chapter for Francesca Mason Boring about the relational neuroscience of nature constellations.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. And I have a book contract, a book manuscript delivery date of December 1st with for a workbook on self-compassion and systemic racism and neuroscience.
Very good.
That I have not yet been able to work on because I got COVID in January, and
Right.
I've had long COVID.
Okay.
I just in this last week started to be able to put together complex thought and follow through
Right.
on a writing plan for
Mm.
Francesca. And before that, it was simply impossible. It was so interesting. People
Mm.
described a brain fog, but I didn't have a fog. I had like blankness instead of
Right.
fog. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had it back in October, and my main thing was just utter exhaustion. I didn't want to do anything, and
Mm.
I just surrendered to it. I thought, well, okay, I'm meant to sleep for a fortnight. I'll sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I did. And I didn't know my body was capable of sleeping for so many hours.
Right. Did you come out well on the other side?
Eventually, but it did take a while.
How long did it take you?
Um, I don't know, probably a couple of months, to really feel, oh, this is me again,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That exhaustion would hit me every now and then, but I didn't know what was like me just working too hard,
Yeah.
There's sort of some reality to that. And the whole COVID thing's been quite turbulent for me, because I'm not vaccinated and I'm in a family that are, and
Mm,
the divides of how you manage to negotiate that and allow the other to be in a different place, and you're in one place, they're somewhere else.
yeah.
That's not been an easy journey, definitely not.
No.
But we got through it, particularly my two brothers. And I think what kind of united us in the end was saying, look, what's this about? What's this conflict about? I love you, so I'm concerned about you. You love me, so you're concerned about me. That's the bottom line where we
Yeah,
meet each other.
yeah, yeah,
So let's just see that that's what's there and that's what's motivating all three of us, and then it got better, got easier.
oh,
We didn't talk too much depth about it, but we managed to navigate our way through enough that we could have some good conversations together. So it's a bit like politics, isn't it? You sort of agree in a family, well, maybe we don't go there today.
it's
So yes, it's
it's
really
interesting times. Yeah, we're
very
living. Somebody cursed us. May you live in interesting times.
well,
Oh,
interesting, but also amazing.
yeah,
It's both sides, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
I've seen some really beautiful things happening as a result
yeah,
of COVID. So it's not all doom and gloom. And the same with trauma. And I
yeah,
see people, well, me included, use their trauma to help others. I mean, what
exactly.
a
Yeah,
wonderful thing,
yeah,
to be able to turn it around and go, hey, yeah, I have some experience of that. I haven't had your trauma, but I have some experience of
yeah,
that. So, here's a hand, maybe I can help you.
yeah, yeah,
So I love that, when I see that with people able to make good use of it and do something wonderful. Yeah.
yeah.
Do you know Russell Brand? Have you heard of Russell Brand?
Is he the handsome and very fast talking man with a talk show?
I went to see him last week or the week
Oh,
before. I mean, he was very funny to start with, very funny. But he's an anarchist as well,
oh
and
yes,
he
yeah,
was really, so
yes.
he was really motivating, and then towards the end, he said to people, "So if you want to stay a little while at the end, I'll do a meditation."
Oh,
So he went from this kind of, you know,
yeah.
fast talking, highly intellectual, inspiring guy to this very quietly
Uh,
spoken, still, calm,
oh,
inviting guy. It was
oh, that's,
lovely. And I'm glad I stayed to the end,
yeah.
because it's been a beautiful meditation. And then he was inviting questions from people, and he was just
Oh.
holding the space really beautifully. So, you
Mm.
know, and of course he jokes about his own
Trauma.
trauma and his own craziness, as he calls it, you know, and swears like a trooper all the way through. But I enjoyed it. It was very good. Yeah. Well, how did I get onto that? I can't remember what we were talking about.
Oh, I don't know. I was just imagining that transition with you rather than tracking what we'd said before. I was just
Oh, I know, turning your trauma into something
yes, yeah,
other than, yeah. So, you know, the guy was out of it. He was a drug addict, you know. So I think it's a great inspiration for people because he's
yeah,
come through, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and he, you know, he's openly says I'm crazy, you know, but he still is able to inspire other people, you know.
Yeah,
That's wonderful, isn't it?
it is
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah,
And that's a wonderful place to close for today.
yeah.
Thank you for
Lovely to
having
catch
this
up with you
conversation
again.
with me.
You never know quite where we're going to travel, do we? But
No,
it's lovely.
no, but it's very good. And I'll
Yeah.
look forward to our next one and good luck with the birth process for June.
Thank you. Yes. All right.